Good morning. Very quickly, thank you very much, Carl, for responding to my video on Year 6 and 11 English Divine Language. Unfortunately, your video response to King James Bible, the Perfect Will of God, didn't actually answer any of the questions as to whether the language spoken in the period of time where the King James Bible was written was divine or not. Didn't address the issue of what translations of the Bible speakers of other languages should read, and you gave no actual evidence as to why we should have only the King James Bible, apart from trying to justify your position from the King James Bible itself. Firstly, I will reiterate, as I've always done, that I am not against the King James Bible. It's just I'm against King James onlyism, because if you do get people believing that they should dance around with snakes and stuff because of mistranslations and text which is not in the original manuscripts, the older manuscripts, should I say, because that's true, you don't have the actual manuscripts that were actually penned that we know of by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, etc. But we do have some copies that go to indicate that they are reliable when compared against other copies made at similar sort of time span. If I could just comment on some of the things you've actually saying, if the King James Bible, as it does in the majority of cases, says that it is the Word of God, it is because the text it was translated from claimed to be the Word of God, and it's just putting what the Hebrew said and the Greek said into English. It's not saying that this physical translation of the King James Bible is the Word of God. It's just copying a claim which was made by text earlier. Secondly, as the King James Bible actually says, I've got a couple of copies of it myself, a couple of editions. It was translated from the Hebrew, the Greek, and other translations were consulted. Other translations at the time. The most you had many translations of the Bible in English and other languages were being used. Mainly English translations were being consulted, but there were still translations being consulted. Whereas modern scholarship puts its main emphasis on the use of the original languages of Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. It doesn't rely solely on other English translations of the Bible. It tries to go get as close as it can to the main languages being used. Also, some of your defences, you're talking about the use of the term "Word of God," and you've even quoted passages and verses where the Word of God is actually identified as a person, identified as the Logos, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christos. Okay, he is called the Word of God. He is the Word alive. Does the argument actually go to say that Jesus Christ is the King James Bible? That's what you're implying by using this terminology. Do you not know that, you know, when the King James translators had the King James, their main sources for the Old Testament, especially the Old Testament, was a complete copy of the Old Testament in Hebrew, which was dated at 1000 AD. That was the oldest copy of Hebrew, oldest copy of the Hebrew they had. It was 1000 years after the birth of Christ, which would have roughly made it anything up to 1300 years after the last book of the Old Testament was penned, roughly. Because you know pretty sure that uh, the last books were written just before Alexander's conquest of the area we now know as Palestine. Their oldest copy of the Old Testament wasn't even in Hebrew. It was the Septuagint, the seventh book of the 70, which was a Greek translation. The Old Testament in Koine Greek, and it's pretty much from there that we have reliable copies of the what they call the Apocrypha, Deuterocanonical books, which are in the Septuagint, which of course were not accepted by the Jews as canon. They were not accepted by the Christian Church as canon. Yeah, the Roman Catholics did for a bit in the 15th, 16th century, officially, but they've sort of unofficially dropped it. Or as they've officially dropped it, but sort of unofficially keep a few doctrines based upon it. Okay, so there's a 1300-year difference. Okay, now we have found manuscripts written within that 300 years before the birth of Christ of the Old Testament in Hebrew, and the differences in them are minor. The differences in them are minor, and even what there are like colloquial spelling differences. I mean, I don't know how you Yanks work at all. I don't even know if you are a Yank. You might be. This is how we term Americans. You might be offended if you're from a southern state. I don't know. No offense intended. But in England, we've got we have the English, the Welsh, the Scots. Okay, and there are certain dialects which would creep in to the English language. Okay, and you know there are certain ways that a guy from me close to London would spell something or say something, and maybe someone who lives up in Yorkshire, in the city of York, might put a little northern twist on the word, but it's still the same word and still the same terminology. And it's those sort of minor differences between the old text, the Old Testament, and the text which they would have used in the King James. But it's in the Greek, which has been which is most contested. But there are more copies of the Greek of the New Testament because writing and printing and reproducing was so much improved come the time that the gospel went around. That's why God chose Koine Greek to be the language He wanted the Bible written in, the New Testament written in, because it was the business language at the time. It was the equivalent of the English at the time, spoken all over the place. It was a business language, and it was far more accurate and expressive than English is today. Yeah, the Greeks had 3 words for love. We have 1 word, love, or as the King James says, charity, and that's, to modern English, is giving money to worthy causes, not anything to do with love. So, it's a response you've given me, but you haven't answered any of the questions, and there's nothing to say that I should, that I am not a real Christian if I don't read the King James Bible. It's a response, but it's not an answer to the question.